She called me toxic in my own kitchen. Not shouted, not hissed. Just placed on the table between the teacups like a bitter lemon wedge no one asked for. The kettle was still singing when she said it. Steam fogged the small square window above the sink. The light outside was a winter gray that made the whole room feel smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to hear. My hand was on the gas knob. I turned the flame off because, all at once, it felt wrong to let anything burn. Toxic, she repeated, almost gently, like she was offering me a clean word for a dirty feeling. I think it's best if you step back. The cups waited empty. The spoons glinted. Somewhere in the living room, the old wall clock ticked in the slow, patient way of things that have survived too many arguments to take sides anymore. I did what I always do when my heart stumbles. I checked the tea leaves. I swirled them once, twice, as if the future might be hiding there among the small curled fists. The scent was strong, cardamom, dust of ginger, a memory of home. I poured without looking up. If that's what you need, I said finally, sliding her cup across the table, then I'll step back. She didn't touch the tea. Her lipstick left no mark on the rim because she never brought the cup to her mouth. She watched me with the careful, cautious gaze you give a stray dog, soft, but ready to slam the door. Thank you, she said. This is healthier for everyone. Everyone meant her, my son, the life they were building that did not have space for my old recipes, my quiet reminders, my habit of tucking a shawl around the shoulders of conversations that felt cold. I nodded, because pride is only ever useful when it keeps you from saying something you can't take back. Inside, something folded, like a letter you're not finished reading. I'll still make the achar, I heard myself say, absurdly. He likes mango when the season is wrong. She lowered her eyes. We're trying to cut down on old habits. Old habits. I stood, carried the untouched cups to the sink, and listened to the small porcelain sound they made when they kissed the steel. A distant motorbike coughed to life outside. A neighbor's baby began to cry. Everywhere, life continued. In my chest, a different clock started. I stepped away. Before that day, my life could be measured in small, faithful rituals. I woke before the sun remembered its name and boiled water in the dented kettle my husband once swore he'd replace and never did. I watered the tulsi plant on the balcony. I touched my mother's bangles lined in the red dish on the dresser as if they might still be warm from her wrists. My son, Arjun, used to leave for work at 8:30 sharp, shirt pressed, hair damp, a gratitude that lived more in his eyes than in his mouth. He'd say, "Ma," in that distracted way men do when their bodies are already halfway down the stairs. And I'd say, "Eat," in the same tone a lighthouse uses for ships it will never board. Ria arrived like spring arrives in houses that have learned to expect winter. She didn't knock the first time. Arjun had given her a key. She let herself in with the careful, bright smile of someone entering a museum, respectful of the relics, impatient with the dust. She touched my feet the way girls do when they were taught once and remember barely. She smelled like rain and department stores. Her earrings were small as commas. She was not unkind. It's important I tell you that, and I will tell you again, because the mind loves villains and life rarely gives them. Ria loved my son in the way a person loves a project, earnestly, with checklists. She wanted him to drink more water, to use nicer plates, to buy towels that didn't betray their age by feeling like yesterday. Arjun loved being so loved. He softened under her attention the way bread softens under steam. He laughed more. He worked later. He said, "we," when he meant she and I, and at first the sound of it was a song I didn't know the words to. Our home changed slowly, graciously, like a room that finds a new angle for its light. The brass lamp moved from the center table to the shelf. "It'll be safer here," Ria said, and I agreed, though the lamp had survived 20 years of my clumsiness and one ill-tempered cat. The heavy curtains became shears. We replaced the dining cloth with something that wiped clean without being washed, a small miracle I pretended not to admire. I offered recipes, then offered silence when recipes felt like stones in a soup that no longer needed weight. I folded myself at the edges of their calendar, birthdays, doctor visits, the Sunday market where they bought strawberries and I bought time. Sometimes love is a quiet subtraction. You remove yourself in teaspoons and hope nobody notices until you've learned how to miss what you still have. Arjun called me Ma less and Ma more, as if the extra vowel might hold me further away or closer. I could never tell which. He still reached for my chutney without looking. He still asked me about the neighbor's son, the one who sang at odd hours and frightened the pigeons. But the thread between us had become thin enough to feel when wind pressed it. Ria and I moved around each other with the grace of dancers who don't share the music. She put her chargers on the console where I kept prayer flowers. I placed flowers around her chargers like they were small gods that might be pleased. She offered to streamline my pantry, and I smiled my permission, then stood outside the kitchen and listened to the sound of jars being renamed. We were both trying. I hold that truth like a candle. We were both trying in languages the other did not speak fluently. The evening she called me toxic, dinner was Pollock Painter and a salad I learned on YouTube because she said greens help with sleep. Arjun was late. The rice waited. The doorbell rang twice. The news on TV spoke softly about a politician whose name sounded like a warning. Ria sat across from me with her spine telling me an essay about posture. She had the glow good intentions give you before the consequence arrives. I know this is hard, she began, hands wrapped around the tea she wouldn't drink, but you give advice as if it's medicine, and we never asked for a prescription. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was accurate in a way that felt like walking into a glass door you didn't know was there. I'm learning to be quiet, I said, and realized, as I spoke, how proud that made me and how sad. She nodded, praised me for it as if I were a student who had finally stopped chewing gum in class and then asked me to do more. Step back. Give them space. Let their marriage breathe. I thought of breath, how it is the first thing a mother teaches and the last thing she witnesses. I thought of my husband, gone 5 monsoons now, whose laugh still lived in the pantry if you opened the cumin jar. I thought of my boy, whose first word was not ma, but there, pointing at everything he wanted to name so it would not vanish. Okay, I said. I will go upstairs. Upstairs was 2 rooms and a small balcony. My room, my memories, my mother's bangles in the red dish, my husband's socks I couldn't throw away because they still stood in the shape of his ankles when washed. I moved. Not out. Not far. But far enough that the air on the ground floor did not need to pass through me to get to them. That first week, I tried to make absence look like a gift. I timed my errands for their meal times. I learned the street names I had ignored for 20 years. I became friendly with the fruit seller, who called me Didi in a way that knew I wanted to be somebody's. Elder still. Arjun came up the second night with a plate I hadn't asked for and the tired smile of a man who believes in balance like a religion. Ria is trying, he said. She reads a lot about healthy boundaries. I touched his cheek as if I were checking for fever. I am trying too. He looked relieved, then guilty about being relieved. Ma, he said, and the word walked slowly across the room to sit beside me on the bed. I want this to work. I know, I said. I did not tell him that this had become a bridge with a toll I wasn't sure how to pay. At night, the house sounded different from upstairs. You hear laughter with the ceiling between you and it no longer feels like an invitation. It feels like rain on someone else's roof. I learned the music of their footsteps, the way 2 lives decide which side of a hallway belongs to whom. I learned that grief takes off its shoes when it enters, so you will not hear it coming. I kept living. I did not disappear. I practiced appearing only when called, a new discipline for an old heart. And then, because every story I tell you will have a moment that tilts it, a small, strange thing happened. Something so quiet I might have ignored it if not for the way God sometimes taps your shoulder in a crowded room and points. It began with a breath in the middle of the night. The kind that sounds like a person trying not to cry. And then a light in the hallway that should not have been on. I opened my door, waited, listened. The clock downstairs kept its patient time. Something had changed in the air, and the air is rarely wrong. The house was quiet, but not still. There's a difference. Stillness has peace in it, quiet has warning. That night, I stood in the dark hallway with the light from downstairs spilling in soft yellow squares across the tiles. I could hear Ria's voice, hushed but trembling, coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought she was on the phone. Her words came in small, broken pieces. I don't know what to do. I didn't mean it like that. And then silence. Then a small sound, like a sob pressed into the sleeve of a sweater. My first instinct was to go to her. I am a mother. It's what my body does before my mind catches up. But something stopped me. Maybe the memory of her saying I was toxic, or maybe just the realization that I wasn't part of their circle anymore. So instead, I stepped back into my room, closed the door, and listened to the rain brushing against the balcony glass. When I saw her the next morning, her eyes were puffy and red, though her voice was steady as she asked, "Could you please pack less salt in the curry, Ma?" I nodded. Not because of the salt, but because it was easier than asking why she'd been crying in the kitchen at midnight. Over the next few days, small things began to shift, the way light shifts before a storm. Arjun left early, came home later. His words became shorter. "Work's crazy," he'd say, kissing the top of Ria's head before disappearing into the bedroom. And Ria, who had once filled silence with conversation, began filling it with noise instead. The TV played too loud. The washing machine ran at odd hours. She played music while cooking, upbeat songs with lyrics that didn't sound like her anymore. When I asked, "Is everything okay?" she smiled. But the smile was wrong. It had corners too sharp to belong to peace. One afternoon, while hanging clothes on the balcony, I noticed her phone lying on the chair by the window, the screen still glowing with an open message. I didn't mean to look. But sometimes, the truth doesn't need your permission. It was a message from someone named R. The words were simple. "He doesn't understand you. You deserve more." I froze, clothespin in hand, the wet edge of a shirt dripping onto my feet. I'd known that kind of message before, not those exact words, but the kind that sound like comfort and taste like temptation. I didn't know what it meant or who it was, but the ache in my chest told me this wasn't just friendship. When she came into the room, I looked away quickly, pretending to be busy with the laundry. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said, though I think she knew I'd seen it. Her face tightened for a second, and then she smiled again, polite, rehearsed, like someone performing calm. That night, I dreamt of my husband. He was standing by our old window, the one we never fixed properly. He didn't speak, but he was holding something small in his hand, a piece of broken glass. When I woke, my heart knew before my mind did, something in this house was cracking. The next morning, Arjun forgot his wallet. It was such a small thing, but I remember it because it became the first time in months that he looked me in the eyes when he came back to get it. "Ma," he said, half out of breath, "you still keep things where they always were, huh?" "I do," I said softly. "Some habits are good for the heart." He smiled, tired, thin, but real. And for a moment, it was like time had forgiven us. But Ria stood in the doorway behind him, her hands folded tight around a mug she wasn't drinking from. And whatever peace had entered the room left with the sound of the door closing behind him again. That afternoon, I saw her standing in front of the mirror in the living room, holding her phone close to her chest as if it were a shield. Her reflection looked like someone caught between running and staying. "I didn't mean to look," I said quietly from the doorway. But I saw the message. Her shoulders stiffened. "You were snooping?" "No," I said. "Just hanging clothes." She turned, her voice rising just enough to hide her fear. "You always think you know better, don't you? You just wait for me to fail so you can play the saint." I didn't answer. Because the truth is, I had once been that woman, proud, defensive, clinging to mistakes because they were the only things that were mine. "Ria," I said finally, "sometimes love looks like interference. Sometimes silence does more harm." She stared at me, eyes wet but angry. "This is why I called you toxic," she said. "You always make everything about you." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was only trying to protect what was breaking. But I'd already promised to step back. So I nodded, turned away, and carried the sound of her words upstairs like a bruise that wouldn't show. That night, there were no footsteps in the hallway. No laughter. Just a sound I hadn't heard before, a phone vibrating endlessly against a hard surface. When it stopped, there was silence again. And then a whisper through the thin walls. Ria's voice, not angry, not cold, just tired. "Please," she said softly, "just answer me." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since stepping away, I prayed not for my own peace, but for theirs. 2 weeks later, I came home from the temple to find the door slightly open. Not wide enough to be danger, just wide enough to be worry. Inside, the air smelled faintly of perfume and burnt rice. A suitcase lay half-packed on the couch. Rhea sat beside it, her face pale, her hands shaking as she folded a shirt that didn't look like it belonged to her. "I'm leaving," she said without looking up. My throat tightened. "And Arjun?" Her eyes flickered, a mix of shame and relief. "He doesn't know yet." I sat beside her, not speaking. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a bird called once, sharply, like a warning. After a long silence, she said, "You were right about silence doing harm." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw the girl beneath the armor. Scared. Lost. Trying to hold her mistakes together like broken glass. "What happened, Rhea?" I asked gently. She swallowed hard. "He found out about our..." The room felt smaller. The kettle on the counter clicked as it cooled. "Does he know everything?" She nodded slowly, tears welling up. "He said he needs time, space. I don't think he's coming home tonight." Her voice broke on the last word. Without thinking, I reached over and took her hand. She flinched at first, then let it rest in mine. Her fingers were cold. "Love doesn't end this way," I said softly. "It just changes shape until it finds where it belongs again." She shook her head. "He hates me now." "No," I whispered. "He hurts. And hurt makes people quiet." We sat there until the clock struck 10. Neither of us spoke again. But that was the first night she didn't call me toxic. The morning after Rhea confessed, the house felt hollow, not empty, but echoing. Her suitcase was still on the couch, half open, as if it too hadn't made up its mind whether to stay or go. I found her sitting by the dining table, staring at the cup of tea I'd made for her hours earlier. The surface had gone cold, but she hadn't noticed. Her hair was tied in a loose knot, her eyes swollen from crying. I said nothing. I simply sat across from her, like we were two women waiting for a storm to finish breaking. After a while, she spoke, her voice brittle. "He didn't come home last night." I nodded slowly. "I tried calling," she continued, "but he didn't answer. I think he's disgusted with me." Her words trembled, and for a moment, she looked like a child who'd broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. I reached for the kettle, poured her a fresh cup, and said quietly, if disgust was all he felt, he would have shouted. "Silence means there's still something left, maybe love, maybe confusion. But something." She looked up at me then, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why are you being kind to me?" It was a fair question. One I had asked myself the night before while lying awake. Because I had hated her once, maybe not with fire, but with frost. The way she replaced my voice in my son's life, the way she called my care control. But hate, I'd learned, is just love that's been buried too long. Without air. I met her gaze. Because I was once the woman who made mistakes and had no one left to pour her tea. That day, she didn't leave. She unpacked a little, moving through the house like a ghost trying to remember where she belonged. In the evening, I heard her talking softly on the phone. No anger this time. Just a quiet desperation. "Please, Arjun. I know I hurt you. I just want to talk." His answer came in a voice message later, not shouting, just heavy. "I need time, Rhea. Don't call me for now." She played it over and over until her tears ran out of sound. I wanted to tell her time doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just teaches you how to live with what won't. But instead, I made dinner. She didn't eat much, but when I placed a small bowl of dal in front of her, she whispered, "Thank you, Ma." The word caught me off guard. It was quiet, unsure, like a bird testing its wings. I didn't correct her. I didn't even answer. I just let the words sit there between us, fragile but real. Days turned into a week. Arjun stayed away, calling only once to ask if I was all right. He didn't ask about Rhea, and I didn't volunteer information. I could hear the strain in his voice, the ache of a man caught between anger and grief. After that call, I sat for a long time with my rosary beads, thinking of how easily love turns to pride and pride to silence. That's when I realized silence was the real toxin in this house, not me. A few nights later, I found Rhea sitting on the balcony floor, surrounded by photo albums. They were old, from Arjun's childhood, the ones I had kept tucked away in a trunk under my bed. She was tracing the edges of one picture, Arjun, about 10 years old, holding a paper kite almost as big as his body. His smile filled the frame. "He used to smile like this," she murmured, "before I made everything about what wasn't perfect." I sat beside her. The night air was cool. The city was quiet, except for the distant hum of a passing train. "Perfection is a hungry thing," I said softly. "It eats joy first." She laughed through her tears. "I thought I was helping him grow. I thought if I fixed everything, he'd be proud of me." "Love doesn't need fixing," I said. "It just needs room." She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Did you and your husband ever fight like this?" I smiled faintly. "We fought over everything, which side of the bed, which color curtains, which prayers to say for luck. But we always made tea afterward." She smiled, a real one this time. "Maybe we forgot the tea." A few days later, the doorbell rang. It was Arjun. He stood there with tired eyes, his shirt rumpled, hair uncombed. The kind of look you wear when life hasn't let you sleep for days. "Ma," he said softly. I stepped aside to let him in. His gaze moved around the room until it found Rhea standing by the balcony, clutching one of the photo albums like a shield. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Rhea broke the silence. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, but she stood tall. "You didn't deserve what I did. I let my own fears become your punishment." Arjun's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. "You lied to me, Rhea." "I did," she whispered. "And I regret it every day." The clock ticked between them, marking every second of what they'd lost. He looked at her for a long moment before turning to me. "Ma, did you know?" I shook my head. "Not until it was already breaking." He exhaled sharply, hands on his hips. "I just needed space. I thought if I stayed away, I could figure out what I wanted. But all I've done is replay what went wrong." "And what did?" I asked gently. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward her. "Maybe both of us stopped listening." That was when Rhea broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet collapse of someone who'd been holding her breath for too long. "I thought you'd never forgive me," she said. He stepped forward slowly, unsure, like someone testing the floor after an earthquake. "I don't know if I can yet, but I don't want to keep hating you either." She nodded through tears. "That's enough for me." When they finally sat down together, I excused myself to the kitchen, giving them room to speak freely. I listened from a distance, as mothers do, catching half sentences and long silences that said more than words. By the time I brought out tea, they were sitting close, not touching, but not apart either. Arjun looked up at me, voice low. "You were right, Ma. Silence does more harm." I smiled faintly. "So does pride." Rhea laughed softly, a small, fragile sound, but real. We drank our tea in the same room for the first time in months. No walls, no rules, no toxins. Just three people who'd finally learned that love, at its quietest, is still the loudest thing in a home. Later that night, when they'd gone to bed, I sat by the window watching the rain start again. And I realized something I wish I'd known years ago. Sometimes being called toxic isn't an insult. Sometimes, it's just someone telling you they haven't learned what love looks like yet. And if you're lucky, very lucky, life will give them the lesson. The morning after their long talk, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast, a sound memory more than a scent, one that pulled me back to simpler years when my husband used to forget about the bread until it was almost smoke. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it, Rhea laughing softly in the kitchen. Not loudly, but enough that the house finally sounded alive again. I stepped out quietly. She was there, hair tied up, wearing my old apron with a tiny tear near the pocket. Arjun stood beside her, flipping the toast with exaggerated care while she teased him. "Now it's perfect. Just a little more smoke, and we can call it breakfast." He rolled his eyes, but when he looked at her, the way he looked at her, I saw something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a truce. Rhea noticed me first. She turned with a smile that carried both guilt and warmth. "Good morning, Ma," she said softly. Morning, I replied, stepping closer. It smells familiar. They both laughed. It wasn't the laughter from before, not effortless, but real. The kind that grows out of ruins because people finally stop pretending the cracks aren't there. That day, Arjun decided to work from home. It wasn't spoken, but I knew it was his quiet way of saying, I'm staying. Ria moved through the rooms cleaning, humming. And every time I saw her pause, staring at the walls or the photos, I could tell she was still carrying her shame like an invisible shawl. In the afternoon, I made kheer, Arjun's favorite. When I offered some to Ria, she hesitated. I don't deserve sweetness from you, Ma, she said. I smiled faintly. Sweetness isn't a reward. It's a reminder that life can still be kind. She blinked back tears. I don't know how you can forgive me after everything I said. Because I remember who I was when I didn't know better, I said gently. And I hope someone would have forgiven me too. She didn't answer, just took the bowl, her hands trembling slightly. 2 days later, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Ria's mother. A woman who looked carved from iron, proud, elegant, with the kind of posture that made you want to apologize before she even spoke. She'd never visited before. Mrs. Mehta, she greeted curtly, her eyes sweeping the living room like she was assessing a battlefield. Is Ria home? Ria came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Ma, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman frowned. You didn't return my calls. Ria lowered her head. I didn't know what to say. Her mother sighed. You could have said you were sorry. You embarrassed us. The word "us" landed like a stone. I wanted to speak, to say something that would ease the tension, but Ria's mother turned to me. I warned her, she said sharply. I told her that interfering with her husband's family would ruin her marriage. That sometimes mothers-in-law mean well, but poison slowly. I see now I wasn't wrong. I froze. Ria stepped forward quickly. No, Ma, you're wrong. She's the only one who stood by me when I fell apart. Her mother blinked, stunned. What? Ria's voice cracked as she continued. I called her toxic once. I blamed her for everything that went wrong. But she's the one who kept this home standing when I couldn't. The silence that followed felt holy. Her mother turned to me, uncertain now. Is that true? I gave a small, tired smile. It's true that we all say things we don't mean when we're hurting. And it's true that family is what's left after the words are gone. Ria's mother didn't reply. She looked between us, her daughter in tears, me standing still, and I could see the realization flicker in her eyes. Pride and regret wrestling quietly. Finally, she nodded. Then I misjudged you, Mrs. Mehta. Call me Asha, I said softly. She hesitated, then said, thank you. Asha. And just like that, an old wound in another woman's heart began to heal, too. That evening, the three of them sat at the table together, me, Ria, her mother, talking not about blame, but about beginnings. Arjun joined us later, slipping his hand into Ria's under the table. When I saw that, I excused myself to the balcony. I needed air, not because I was sad, but because peace can be overwhelming after you've lived too long without it. The rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. I watched it trail down the railings and thought about how love returns not all at once, but in small drops that soak you before you realize you're drenched again. Weeks passed. Slowly, carefully, things found their rhythm. Ria started volunteering at a local community kitchen. Arjun laughed again, properly this time, loud enough for the walls to remember. And me? I stopped waiting for an apology and started enjoying. The quiet mornings again, the clink of cups, the hum of the ceiling fan, the smell of cardamom. Sometimes Ria would sit with me while I read the newspaper. She'd pour the tea now, always with too much sugar, just the way her husband liked it, and say things like, I used to think love was about being right. And now? I'd ask. Now I think it's about staying. A few months later, there was another knock at the door. This time, when Ria opened it, she turned to me with a trembling smile. It's the counselor, she said. Arjun and I decided to go together. I nodded. That's good. She hesitated. Will you pray for us? I already have, I said. When they left, hand in hand, I sat alone on the couch and felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, not from fixing anything, but from finally letting things grow without me holding them up. A week later, Ria came into my room with a small wrapped box. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled shyly. "A gift." I know I can't undo the words I said, but I wanted you to have something from me, no guilt, no apology. Just love. I opened it slowly. Inside was a silver locket, plain, elegant, with an engraving on the back. "Thank you for teaching me what love really is." My throat tightened. "Ria," she took my hand. "You were never toxic, Ma. I just wasn't ready to see that love can look like honesty." I pulled her into a hug, and this time she didn't flinch. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet but steady. And for the first time since she entered my life, I realized she was my daughter now. Not by blood, but by battle. That night, I sat by my window, the locket in my hand, the world outside washed clean by the rain. And I whispered to myself, not as a prayer, but as a truth earned, love doesn't shout to be understood. It waits quietly, faithfully, until someone is ready to listen. You know, when she called me toxic, I thought maybe she was right. I'd spent so long trying to hold my family together that I forgot love isn't about control, it's about trust. But what I learned is this: sometimes people don't recognize love when it's quiet. They confuse boundaries for rejection and care for interference. And when they finally see the truth, it's often through the cracks of something broken. If you've ever been called too much or too controlling or toxic, I want you to remember this. Maybe you were just the only one brave enough to love out loud. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting who hurt you. It means choosing to love in a way that doesn't need to win. So tell me, if someone once misunderstood your love, would you step back and let life teach them, or would you still stay close enough to catch them when they fall? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this one touched your heart, subscribe for more real-life stories every day.